Thank you. Start. So I thought we often talk about urban ethnic ghettos and without making the rural hinterland behind these ethnic ghettos understandable. And my story will be focused on the presence, on the emergence of urban and rural ethnic ghettos in Hungary. So the story is that Hungary and the entire ex-Soviet bloc region had its deepest crisis in the peacetime history after 1990. GDP fall back to 80% if I compare 1989 to 1993. Industrial production fall back to 75%. Production of agriculture fall back to 60%. So all the indicators show that this was weaker than the Great Depression of 1929-1993. After 1993, there was a very quick recovery of the Hungarian economy, and there were a lot of new jobs created. As a sharp contrast to this, Hungary lost 1/3 of its jobs between 1989 and 1993. The Hungarian economy hit bottom in 1993, and from 1994 to 2001-2002 there was a pretty fast economic development, but the number of jobs was never more as much it was in 1993 at the bottom, and actually today is even less as it was in 1993. So we must speak about more than a 2/3 unemployment rate within the Hungarian Roma population. Of course, this is a very deep crisis, and it was not possible to avoid the social consequences, but the state could make it, the state and the local governments could make it this crisis less deep, and our argument is that instead of making it less deep, they made it deeper and deeper. And this is my story. Just as an example, social housing, which was dominant in Hungarian cities, not in the entire country, because in rural Hungary, home ownership was dominant. But most of social housing in cities were privatized, and in a very short period of time, Hungary became the country which has the least social housing, I mean in percentage, the least social housing in Europe. It's perhaps Malta is the only country in Europe which has less social housing. In general, renting, private or state, renting housing stock is the lowest percentage in Hungary. So it is very difficult to fight against social consequences of the crisis without any social housing. It was 1990, the first year when population of urban settlements was decreasing in Hungary. So it never ever happened in peacetime history of Hungary, and population of rural Hungary was increasing. It has two main sources. One is suburbanization. Suburbanization was delayed by communist housing policy, but I am not talking about suburbanization today. The other source was ghettoization. It was the fact that many of the poor, which became unemployed and were not able to pay rents and utilities and so on, were pushed out from the city, mostly to urban ghettos. So do I have to switch it off?
No, we can see you.
So this is a map. What it shows concentrations of Roma population in Budapest before the crisis, before the fall of the communist regime. We collected addresses of elementary school pupils who were considered to be Roma by the school teacher, and this shows the concentrations. It's a schematic map because I'm of course not allowed to show I had the exact address, but of course it's not allowed to show them where it is. And it shows that 30%, 50%, about half of the population was concentrated in this belt surrounding the inner city of Budapest. We repeated this 5 years later, and it was already almost two-thirds of the Roma population of Budapest, which was concentrated in that little area. Now, we did not repeat that survey again, but these are based on the census data of the 2001 census. There are methodological differences, and I am not going to go to methodological detail. Those were children, and this is population data, and there are several other differences. These are block statistics, so very detailed data, and it shows that instead of, so what we were expecting, that concentration of the Roma population will increase and the size of the ghetto will expand. This is what we expected, that exactly the opposite happened. Exactly the opposite happened. This map shows that the Roma ghetto was starting to be fragmented, it fall into parts, and we don't have the data of the recent census, and I am afraid I will never be again able to use so detailed data as I was able to use in the year 2001. But we know we have good evidence that this fragmentation of the urban ghetto continued since 2001. And the question is why? And the most important answer is that because many of the poorest of the poor, and especially many of the Roma poor, were pushed out from Budapest and were pushed out from other big cities. Where? This is a map showing Hungary, and this is concentration of excluded population. This is based on block statistics in settlements having more than 2,000 population, and settlements having less than 1,000 population are one units. They are the black. That's the black color of the map. These are small villages having less than 2,000 population. Many of them just 500 or even less population. They were losing population in the 1960s and 1970s. Regional planners believe become depopulated, that actually this was the policy. They wanted to get rid of the communist planners wanted to get rid of the small settlements. This was the policy almost everywhere in Eastern Europe at that time. But these villages did not become depopulated. Instead, population exchange took place. Everybody who could afford moved out, those with having higher education, those having better skills, younger people and so on, they moved out, and more and more hopeless people moved in. So what you see on this map, this is pretty much shocking. It shows that there is a strong concentration on the northeast edge of Hungary. That's from the east Slovakian border. Actually, this terrible area continues in Slovakia. That's where the ghetto riots took place in Slovakia. So, and then here, for example, there are, the first time in Hungary's history, there is ghetto regions. It's not only a neighborhood in a settlement, as it happens here, not only an entire settlement, but many settlements form a continuous ethnic ghetto region. I repeat, this never ever happened in our history. And then this continues on the Ukrainian border. It is less. It seems to be less serious on the Romanian border, but that's only. It only seems to be, because that's a completely flat area where with larger settlements. So therefore, there are Roma ghetto neighborhoods in a larger settlement. This is why. And then in South Hungary continues, and there is another ghetto region here by the old Croatian border. So, what is the difference between urban ethnic ghetto and the rural ethnic ghetto? I think this is when we speak about marginalization and isolation and so on and so forth in the case of urban ghettos, it is much more in a rural ghetto. A rural ghetto is completely excluded from everything. A rural ethnic ghetto is worse than a traditional Roma settlement, because they were always, a traditional Roma settlement was always at the periphery of the settlement, of the village, and those who lived in a Roma settlement had their share in the local distribution of labor. They had the lowest paid, less prestigious, most seasonal jobs, but they will still, their activity was still needed. If you live in a ghetto village, especially in a ghetto area, there are no jobs in a 20, 30, 50 kilometers distance. This is a complete exclusion. So why are rural ghettos important in Hungary? I think they are important everywhere in southern Eastern Europe. First of all, because of something what we call delayed or poor urbanization, which was an important characteristic of state socialist economies, which aimed at creating more jobs in urban settlements than homes for working class people who used to do those jobs. So, by other words, there was a tendency that state communist economies worked with a much higher share of commuter population than capitalist economies. Okay? So given the same level of industrial development, there was a higher share of commuter population. And most of those people those commuters were the first who lost their jobs. They were relatively low-skilled, undereducated workforce, but it was very expensive because the state covered their travel costs, the state covered the entire cost of the hostels where they lived in cities. So it was a low-skilled but relatively expensive labor force, and so they were who lost their jobs, and they were the first who moved back to these villages where they often came from. But the other reason is housing. As I said, Hungary has very few social housing, and local municipalities have a strong interest to get rid of that social housing. So they sell it and or they demolish those social housing and try to gentrify the neighborhood and try to build something fancy for middle classes. And this is why the ghetto was fragmented. It was in a relatively attractive part of Budapest. So they pushed out the poor and they built condominiums and better housing for completely different people. In a country where there was full employment before the second half of the 1980s, it's another question how effective that full employment was. But everybody had a secure job, and everybody had a secure home. It's again another question what kind of secure home that was, but it was secure home. In a country like that, in a fortnight it happened. In a fortnight it happened that people were pushed out and actually further and further away from jobs. So, of course, a lot of new jobs were created, but these unemployed people did not follow those new jobs. Instead, they were pushed out further and further away from jobs because they had the compensation money they received for their home, which was torn down, was very little money. So it was impossible to buy a new home in Budapest for that money. But huge peasant houses, empty peasant houses you can buy for nothing in those peripheral villages because there are absolutely no jobs there. If I go today to a poor neighborhood in Hungary, I will see lots of second generation of unemployed people. If I go to a very poor neighborhood, I see lots of third and often fourth generation of unemployed people. This was completely unimaginable. I saw, first time in my life, I saw something like this in Liverpool. 30 years ago, it was unimaginable. I could never imagine anything like These rural ghettos are typical places of ethnicized poverty. These are places where the population is blamed, criminalized because of their poverty. These are settlements from where the state simply moved out. It was given up by the state, and actually security is outsourced by the state to fascist paramilitary troops. There are at least 5 different sorts of paramilitary troops in Hungary. I did not say now fascist because they are proper fascist paramilitary troops. A lot of people were simply shot in those in those villages, especially at the edge of the ghetto region. Not that much inside the ghetto region, because if a village is already 100% Roma, there is no need to have a conflict. But at the edge, where there is only 30 or 40% Roma, there is a real fight. Not necessarily between the local population and local Roma and non-Roma population, but these paramilitary groups go there and create tensions. So this is an unsustainable way of regional arrangement. This resulted in effect that the unemployment, the share of those who have a permanent job compared to those being inactive in active age is the lowest in Hungary. It's 52%. It's 52% because a lot of people are simply pushed out to those villages where there are no jobs. So there is no chance to, they don't pay tax, of course, because they don't have jobs and so on. So there is no chance to finance an economy like this. And these people often come back to Budapest, and they often come back to other cities where they used to work because they don't have another chance. And then they are pushed out again. So the problem is multiplied. And of course, at the end of the crisis, we don't see that, but every crisis has got an end, they will return to cities. So the problem is not solved, this problem is multiplied, I say. Thank you very much.
Any question, any comment?
I have a question. You've got concentrations of excluded population in Hungary. Are there any other excluded populations, or is it just Roma?
No, okay. I want to. We have a chair. I'm very much afraid. Yeah. We have the number of the excluded population is about, according to my definition, which is based on education exclusion from the labor market, and residential exclusion. It's a combination of that. I have all the maps on that. We have 800,000 excluded people, and about 1/3 of them are Roma. So which is about 5 times over-representation. It's a very strong over-representation, but still most of the excluded population is not Roma. But if somebody lives in a rural Roma ghetto, is considered to be Roma, independent from the fact if the person is Roma or not. And there is very strong, and this is very different from the Afro-American situation. There is very, and there has always been a lot of intermarriage between Roma and non-Roma. So in Hungary we have about 750 to 800,000 people who are considered to be Roma by the outside world, but we have about 250,000 people who self-identify as Roma. But of course, it is absolutely wrong to believe that they are Roma and they are not Roma, because there are lots of half Roma and so on and so forth. So it's more a continuum than two separate cases. But if you live in a ghetto village, you are considered to be Roma, almost independent